Well, Eleni, you touched on with Yolanda Leroux the GDP figures that have hit the South African scene today locally. We'll, of course, be unpacking those figures with Azar Jamin when he joins us a little later on in the show. But given the resilience of many African economies through the economic downturn, the investment potential that the continent boasts has certainly been thrown into the spotlight. Under a month ago, you will remember Tanzania hosted the World Economic Forum on Africa, looking at Africa's position on the 2010 investment heat map. We currently have Godfrey Mutizawa at the 45th annual meeting of the African Development Bank in the Ivory Coast, looking at the economic outlook for Africa. So with all of that, Hubert Danso, Vice Chairman and Managing Director for Africa Investor, joins me now to gauge how Africa's brand in terms of investment is being perceived. Thanks so much, Hubert, for joining us this afternoon. Well, most recently, Africa Investor released the first ever AI-Interbrand Investment Brand Index to gauge how Africa's brand in terms of investment is perceived. So what's the index revealed about the perception that's out there at the moment? Well,
first of all, Africa Investor and Interbrand designed this index to try to establish three things. First of all, we wanted to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of Africa's investment brand in a globally competitive context. We also really wanted to understand the images that the international investment community associated with Africa's investment brand equity, because that hasn't actually been done before. And again, the third sort of objective was to really drill down and begin to look at which countries the investors felt, were effective at communicating their investment brand.
Yeah, well, certainly, despite the fact that we've got many investment opportunities on the continent, unsurprisingly, we've got South Africa having emerged as the perceived top investment destination in Africa. Exactly why South Africa should become a showcase in a balance between government and business policies and the nature of politics in the country. So, how does the country actually rate in terms of achieving that?
Well, I think this is, as we say, it's a perceptional survey. So it's really about how effective the governments are at working across all of the pillars that address economic activity and engagement with the international investment community. And I think on that level, South Africa has been effective. You will note that the majority of the top three countries, so you have South Africa, Egypt, Ghana and Kenya, are all much more aligned with setting up investment brand related councils, because if you don't communicate, you're nowhere in the eyes of the investor. If you don't put the information out there, you can't assist them price the risk. And I think South Africa has been pretty effective at doing that over the years with the International Marketing Council, for one. You see very significant and well-attended business delegations going overseas to put South Africa's business and investment case.
Well, as I was saying in the intro, I mean, a lot of attention is being drawn to Africa via forums, economic forums, to actually illustrate, Africa's investment potential. But from the survey, who stands out as the big influences? Is it these hubs that you've now highlighted that are actually influencing perception out there?
Well, I think they are critical because, obviously they're the most active and they're in front of the investors, and the investors are always, having to engage a number of different constituencies from around the world. So it's a highly complex and competitive investment information market that Africa's playing in. So the most active will obviously be in the minds of the investment community. But I think the key thing that we're actually saying to the governments is you need to understand that economic communication, coordination, and apply proper resources to promoting your investment brand. The returns will speak for themselves. We noted that the investment promotion agencies in Africa, their annual budgets are far less than weekly TV campaigns in United Kingdom. We really need to begin to give this particular issue engagement with the international investment community, support for the domestic investment community, more resources, more attention.
It's a very fine balancing act, because having said all of that, we've seen many governments starting to try and manage their wealth better, specifically with regards to commodities management as we see it. I mean, like in Nigeria, in Tanzania as well, we've seen a new mining tax being implemented there. It is a very fine balancing act to play. So what's your view on how we're managing that, making sure that wealth is evenly distributed locally while maintaining that investment pool?
Well, I think the government are understanding that it's a very important practical step, because no matter what you communicate, there has to be some substance behind it. And you find whether it's an international investor from any sector, the first port of call that they're going to make, they're going to engage the local private sector to say, look, how does the government treat you? What's the local business and investment environment like? So I think the governments are sort of negotiating that fine balance. But again, it's one thing to do the practical stuff on the ground, it's another thing to communicate it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came out of the survey is that Africa is perceived as one of the highest quality global investment destinations, but it lagged all other regions in terms of its investment promotion.
Yeah.
So there are a number of other regions that were perceived to be worse investment destinations than Africa, but they ranked significantly higher because of their effective investment promotion and outreach activities.
In this context, we've got various players from the East, like India, like China, becoming increasingly interested in Africa, seeing the investment potential and that potential for profit outweighing anything else, and seeing that potential without, probably the effective communication tools right in place right now. But why? You've highlighted why China and the greater part of Asia is considered a threat to Africa's productivity and economic development. So let's get into that and what threats are being posed exactly.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call them a threat. What I would say is that, Africa has an opportunity to redefine the way that it engages other regions as investment and trading partners. I think one of the positive things about the way that Asia is coming in, it's really altering the dynamic, the geopolitical dynamic in who invests and how people invest and nations invest in Africa. But it's up to the continent, economic policymakers, to define exactly what they would like to see from those particular partnerships, from those investments.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do a lot more in terms of having clarity about how we actually engage, which sectors we prioritize before we sort of call Asia and China a threat. I think the threat is that if we continue to move forward at a certain pace without a plan.
Yeah.
Yes.